now that we have a good idea of the code that's inside our contract, we're going to use the remix tool to test the contract. So I'm going to pull up a diagram to make the point and to better explain this. Let's see. This is the diagram I want to pull up, and I'll go ahead and do new share on preview. All right. So here it is. Going to resize it. All right, so I have this diagram here to give you a better sense of what Remix is going to do for me. So at this point, I'm sitting inside the Remix editor, and I have some amount of contract source code, and I'm about to have this contract be automatically compiled by the Solidity compiler. That's going to compile it to bytecode. Then it'll be, so here's a Remix editor. A remix editor is compiled to bytecode, and then it's going to be deployed to our in-browser fake network, our fake Ethereum network. And so that'll give us an instance of our inbox contract. And this part here, in-browser fake network, may be surprising. Well, behind the scenes, Remix is not just a code editor. It also hosts a miniature, tiny little Ethereum network that can simulate deploying and interacting with our contract. As I said before, the Remix tool is really fantastic, and Remix is really tops in in that regard. So I'm going to deploy this contract to this in-browser fake network right now. And so I will go ahead and go back to Ethereum or the Remix tool. So let's see. So at the top here is the code, obviously, but this bottom gray area that you've seen in the last few videos, this is the console, and this will describe what is going to be going on in the network. And you'll notice that nothing is being printed out here right now because I haven't interacted with this fake network at all. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click on the Run tab here. And you can see a couple of different things. And so we'll just go through them one at a time. Number one, you're going to find the environment setting. And chances are it might say something like injected Web3, just like it does here right now. And we don't want to use injected Web3. Instead, we want to use JavaScript VM. Great. And so that tells the Remix tool that we want to attempt to deploy our contract to the in-browser virtual Ethereum network. Now below that, we see account. And when you select the JavaScript VM here, that boots up the internal network and then automatically creates a handful of accounts. So you can see this handful here, each of which has 100 Ether to work with. And so these are all accounts that only exist inside our browser right now, and they have been pre-funded with 100 Ether each. Underneath of that, you see something called gas limit. We're not gonna get into that right now. Then finally, we see here value, and value is used to make a transaction and also send along some amount of Ether with the transaction. And we will use this value setting later on as we start to test some of our contracts. Number 5 down here, this is where things start to get interesting in this area. So you see a drop down right here, which has inbox selected. And this is selecting a contract that we want to attempt to deploy to our local test network that is running inside the browser. And number 6, you'll see right here, string initial message, and to the right, it says create. Now, remember I had mentioned that we have a function that has the same exact name as contract, this one here. So because it has the same exact name, this is what we refer to as a constructor function. And constructor functions are automatically deployed whenever we first deploy or create an instance of a contract. Our constructor function says it accepts a string argument, right? Um, and the string argument is called initial message. So notice how string initial message also appears inside the down here. You see string initial message, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter some string and click create. And then once I do that, an instance of my inbox contract will be created. And so the constructor function will be called, and then this constructor function will be called with an initial message of whatever I place in here. So inside of a string, in other words, inside of inside of double quotes, I'll just do, hey there, hey there. All right, and then I'll click create. All right, so we see some activity here in the console. Okay, and now at the bottom right, we have a new entry here. This represents a contract that we just deployed to our local fake network. These are all the different ways that we can interact with the contract itself, right? So this is an instance of the inbox contract, and this instance lists out all the different functions contained on the contract instance itself. So these are buttons, and if we click them, it'll invoke the corresponding function in our contract. The buttons with the bluish violet color means that they are view or constant functions that will return data. The set message function will modify the contents of our contract in some fashion. Set message also tells us what type of input is expected. Set message expects to be called with a string that with a string that's called new message internally. So you see it here, string new message. So if we want to call that function, we have to put something inside of here that specifies exactly what we're trying to update that value to be. So let's click on get message, and we click that, and you see the return of that value here. And it says we got back 0, which is the first return value. And in this case, it only returns one value. If we had multiple values, it would start at 0 and then give us its corresponding value, then go to 1, give us the corresponding value to 1, then 2, give us a value of 2, and so on. So after the 0, we get the type of data, and the type of data that it is a string. Then the actual value returned, and in this case, it's hey there. Now, let's use the set message button as well. And so we need to enter in a new message as a string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do bye girl. All right. So that'll send a function call to our deployed contract. And you can see that inside our console here, you'll be able to see that take place. And that's going to invoke our set message function inside our contract. So notice how when we call set message, it'll update our internal value, or at least we hope it. That's the hope that's exactly what it did. But it did not automatically update the value of hey there. Instead, we have to click on get message. We have to click on get message again to retrieve the new value. So actually, my bad. First, we have to click on set message. And so there we see the transaction to inbox set message pending. And so now we should be able to click on get message. And there we see the bye girl. So at this point in time, I haven't really told you what this contract does. You've seen what it's doing. But let me show you a diagram. I'm going to pull up another diagram to kind of explain what's going on with this contract. I think this is the diagram that I want to pull up. Close that. And close this. And share that with you guys. There we go. Okay. Resize it so you can see it. Okay, so here's a diagram of our contract as deployed on test network. Now, inside the contract storage, we have that message variable, and it can be modified or accessed by either the get message or set message function. And both of those functions can be called by anyone on the Fate network right now. Now, there's only one last thing that I want to point out, and that is uh, the first gotcha with Solidity. So heading back to the remix. Uh, all right. So you see where we have up here get message and then set message, right? And so their purpose is pretty clear, right? So one is going to get the message and the other is going to set the message. But if you look down to the right here, you'll notice we have a third button. It says message. So notice that when I click it, right, we get the same exact value of buy girl. So here's the first gotcha, or maybe it's not a gotcha, but like an interesting fact of how Solidity works, which is that whenever you define a storage variable, if you mark that variable with the public keyword, then your contract will automatically create a new function variable for you, and that new function will have the same exact name as your variable. So if you call that function, it'll return the variable itself. In other words, the get message function we created is superfluous, or in other words, a duplicate of the functionality we already got for free. So because I use the public keyword here on message, it automatically created a new function for us behind the scenes. So I may want to delete the this whole get message function and get rid of it altogether, because we could just make use of the pre-generated message function that has provided this button here already. And it's going to return that same value anyways, right? And I think that that's exactly what I'm going to do, but I will be doing that off the air. And so stay tuned.